The problem with that, however, is that, again, the people that are often may need the service the most are impacted the most by its unavailability. Those being young women, poor women with families, may not have the financial or even the emotional resources in which to travel to another state to gain this basic medical procedure. In 1991, 2 freestanding clinics opened in Alberta, Canada. They are an outreach of the Morgentaler Clinics project in Eastern Canada. Henry Morgentaler is an abortion rights activist in Canada and is almost single-handedly responsible for Canada getting abortions available outside of the hospitals. This is a little ironic because for years at Blue Mountain Clinic, we have provided hundreds of abortion procedures to women who are from Canada, generally from Alberta. They travel down from the areas of Red Deer, Edmonton, Calgary. The reason that they come down is not that abortion is illegal. In fact, the Canadian government, through its governmental health plan, actually pays for abortion procedures. But access has become so limited, and providers of abortion have become so rare that they cannot get in to get a procedure in a timely manner. So they come over the border, and this happens all across the border of the United States. With the oncoming of the Edmonton and Calgary clinics, which are freestanding clinics, those women now do not have to leave their country to get this simple, safe procedure. And that is as it should be. Ironically, if abortion were to become limited in Montana, along the lines that we've been discussing, we may be going to Canada to get our legal, safe abortions. In dollars, what that means is today a first trimester procedure is available pretty much throughout Montana at about $320. If you were to need to go to Edmonton today to get that same procedure, you would pay about $550 plus your travel and lodging expenses. Again, there are some people whom that certainly might be an opportunity for, but low-income women, women with families, and young women are unlikely to have the wherewithal financially or emotionally to cross the border into another country and pay 3 times what they would have paid in their own neighborhood to have this procedure. I guess I would like to say something positive also. I think that we get into kind of a doom mode when we start to talk about Roe going down. And I hear people say that if we lose Roe, we really will be turning back the clock. It really will be 1972 again. And while I think that there are certainly some similarities, and I think that Judy Smith did a good job outlining what it was like back then, home abortions, self-induced abortions, things like that. The thing that we need to keep in mind is that in this country now we have had 19 years of safe, legal abortion. And the impact of that will not go away immediately. What we have as a result of that is we have a lot of trained medical personnel, doctors, nurses, counselors, who know a lot about safe abortion practice, and that will serve us well. The other thing that we have is 19 years of education, 19 years of knowing what it's like to be able to choose, 19 years of understanding the safety of abortion in the United States, and that can be again. So I don't think it will be like starting over. And I don't want to diminish how hard it would be to lose all of that and then try to get it back. I think it's always harder to get something back after you lose it. But we are in a different place. Lastly, I'd like to draw some attention to the idea that we need to focus not just on should abortion be legal or the legal versus non-legal abortion argument. As someone who's been involved in abortion provision for several years, it really, for me, is just as important that we talk about access. And that can be on several levels. Access in terms of not enacting laws that are punitive and that will make it very hard for women to actually obtain abortions from people who find it very hard to provide them those abortions. And those laws are many. Another aspect of that is the physicians that provide abortions. We need to make sure that they are able to operate in an environment that allows them to continue to provide that service. Both financially, emotionally, and in communities in which they experience the support and for the importance of that task. One aspect of that is that we need to make sure that in medical schools, abortion practice is taught as a routine part of residency. It's important that, as Vivian brought up, that we start to look hard at what is happening to people that provide abortion services. Physicians should not be harassed in their homes. Staff of abortion clinics should not be followed and their families harassed in their homes. It's important that women and their partners be able to get into clinics and then to get out of clinics whenever they want to. All of the above are access questions that I think are going to become worse and worse, particularly if we see Roe v. be eroded. And I hope that we can fight to keep abortion legal, but also not lose sight of the fact that even if abortion is legal, if no one can possibly provide the service or no one can possibly get to the service, it just may not matter as much. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Lindsay Richards. I've practiced OBGYN in Missoula for the past 10 years, providing the entire range of obstetrical and gynecological services, including abortions. First, I'd like to say that there is no medical debate about abortion. For a woman who is pregnant, it is enormously safer to have a legal abortion than to carry her pregnancy to term. She faces a 5 times greater risk of death and a 20 times greater risk of needing a major operation if she does continue her pregnancy. The abortion debate is a social and a moral debate, and not a question of what is safest for the woman. Second, I'd like to restate the obvious, and I think that's been mentioned before here. If abortion becomes illegal, it will still go on. Women have always sought out abortions when they felt that they couldn't continue a pregnancy. If abortion becomes illegal, women with knowledge and money will travel to other states, and the less informed, poorer women will find illegal local abortion providers. These abortionists will not be regulated by law or by the medical profession. Their training may be inadequate, their techniques poor, and serious complications, including death, will inevitably increase. That said, I would like to speak more personally now and sort of philosophically. I invite you to try to imagine what it would take to ensure that no unintended pregnancy ever occurred. There'd have to be perfect birth control, 100% effective, no side effects, easy to acquire, at no cost, foolproof to use, and available to all sexually mature men and women. There'd have to be almost perfect people. People who always took complete responsibility for their sexual actions, who never were swayed by passion or influenced by drugs or alcohol. There would have to be an absence of exploitation of women. All women would have to be skilled in asserting their wishes and insisting that they be respected. And until these things are all achieved, we will have unintended pregnancies. Now, by acknowledging the reasons that unintended pregnancies occur, I do not mean to completely excuse men and women from responsibility for the pregnancy. In too many cases, pregnancy occurs because men and women are not using any birth control at all, or not consistently. And I believe we should all try to be mature and moral people and to take responsibility for the consequences of our actions. However, I do not believe that bearing a child should be required as punishment for an unintended pregnancy. Raising a child is an enormous undertaking with enormous consequences for the woman involved, for the man if he's involved, for the child most of all, and for our society. Raising a child is one of the most important things any of us ever do. And most of us want our children to be raised in a loving and secure family with a mother and a father both committed to their nurture over the long haul. Some women, finding themselves pregnant but not in a position to provide all that they want for their child, choose to abort their pregnancy. I feel this is their right, and being trained to provide this service, I feel obliged to do so. I personally do not believe that the fertilized egg, the embryo, or the early fetus has a moral right to continuing life that outweighs the woman's right to decide when and if she will undertake the physical risks, the emotional burden, and the moral responsibility of bringing a child into the world. However, there are many people who disagree with me, who have a deeply held conviction that when sperm and egg join, a complete human being is formed who has all the rights and claims to protection as does a fully born baby. In their moral framework, abortion is murder, and they're strongly motivated to do whatever they can to prevent it. So we have a situation where unintended pregnancies will continue to occur. Some women acting on their own beliefs as applied to their own lives will continue to choose to have abortions. Other people will be horrified by this choice and will try very hard to stop them. I can't see how this conflict of values is going to change substantially in the foreseeable future, and probably not in our lifetime. I also don't feel that I personally have the choice to avoid the issue. My own values, that every child be wanted and optimally cared for, and that women have the right and the moral responsibility to make their own decision about when and if to have children, my values require that I support access to legal abortion. And my training and skills oblige me to perform abortions for women who've decided that that is the right choice for them. Now, I am not a person who enjoys conflict. It is very painful for me to find myself attacked by anti-abortion demonstrators and to be accused of murder when I am acting on my own deeply held values and my respect for women and my value of children, and my hope for the better world that I believe would emerge if all children were loved, nurtured, and adequately provided for. So here I am, caught in a conflict that won't go away and that I cannot in conscience avoid. My discomfort regarding this issue reached a peak several weeks ago. As you're probably aware, there was a series of anti-abortion demonstrations at Missoula hospitals and clinics. At 2 a.m., my phone rang. This is not at all unusual in our house, and I answered expecting to find the hospital on the phone to discuss something about a patient. Instead, a man's voice came and in a coarse whisper said, "Stop killing babies." And he hung up. And the phone rang again and again. And each time we picked it up, the person on the other end would hang up again. It was a very restless night for me, lying there in the dark, sleeping fitfully. I felt invaded. I thought of the bombing at the Helena Planned Parenthood Clinic. I thought of unbalanced people, encouraged toward violence by their belief that they're doing God's will. I felt fear and anger. But during that time, I had a dream. And I'm not one that does a lot with dreams. In the dream, this night, I was the obstetrician for a woman who was in labor. And she and her husband were anti-abortion activists who felt somewhat hostile toward me, and thus were difficult to deal with. But in my dream, I tried to make them comfortable and provide them with good medical care, even though their disapproval made that a challenge. I have since taken that dream as something of a guide to me. I'm set in a relationship of conflict with people who disagree with me. I experience their disapproval and hostility, but I don't want to react and to end up living in a situation of fear and anger. I don't want that for my life. But instead to try to find a way to care for them too. And I recall a poem that I learned in Sunday school, and it helps to give me a way to try not to get caught up and sort of trapped in the negative side of the situation. And here's the poem. They drew a circle to put me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win. We drew a circle that put them in. Thank you.
The Women's Center decided to sponsor this forum because we feel very strongly about a woman's right to choose. We chose these speakers because they are all providers in the community of choices and services that we believe are essential in a woman's reproductive freedom. We believe a woman doesn't truly have this freedom until society accepts its responsibility to give all women access to information concerning each of her options, until it gives her the opportunity and means to carry out her choice, and until it ensures support of her unconditionally in her decision. The women on the panel have worked hard to make a woman's legal right to choose a reality, and it is infuriating that they are being harassed and attacked for this. We feel a sense of urgency in mobilizing pro-choice forces on campus in support of the providers in our community and against current legislative attempts to bring restraints to our reproductive freedom. Women have had to fight for their rights, and we will have to continue to fight to keep them. We are seeing now that we cannot take our rights for granted, not even the right to control our own bodies. It is frightening to think that anti-choice calls to the legislature outweigh pro-choice calls 10 to 1. We don't think this accurately represents the attitudes of women in Montana, and especially not on our campus. Therefore, there is an urgent need for us to speak out, and we believe that students can and are willing to make a difference.
My name's Jennifer Gibson, and I'm a student here like Charlotte is. And we're both volunteers at the Women's Center. And we figure that there's at least 7 ways that we can become active supporters of choice right now. I think everybody's mentioned them already, but I will go ahead and say them again. One is to support the providers of all pregnancy options with contributions, patronage, and volunteer support. Support not only clinics and doctors that provide abortion services, but also those, and often they're the same ones, like Willa and Lindsay, that provide prenatal care and delivery services. Volunteer at and donate to family planning centers and adoption agencies. Work to improve child care facilities and accessibility. Improvement of all these things will contribute to women's true freedom of choice when it comes to pregnancy options. Number 2, become a member of a pro-choice organization. Today, they're out in the lobby. Montanans for Choice is a statewide group that works to enhance reproductive rights, especially through political and legislative channels. Missoula Pro-Choice is a chapter of Montanans for Choice, and they're both affiliated with the National Abortion Rights Action League. Campus for Choice is a group that's just getting together, and anyone interested in that can come to the Women's Center and talk to us, or there's some numbers of the people to call out at the table in the lobby. So when you leave here, go out and fill out a membership card. There's a small fee for Missoula Pro-Choice and Montanans for Choice, but that money is really well spent lobbying for our reproductive rights. Number 3, write letters to the editor. Let the Missoula know that its readership is pro-choice, even if those letters aren't printed. Number 4, supposedly everybody in here is registered to vote. Make sure you are, and get all your friends to register as well. You can always get those cards in the library. Montperg does tables a lot, those places. Number 5 is vote, and vote knowledgeably. Become aware of each candidate's stand on reproductive issues, which Vivian talked a lot about. Number 6, call and write to your legislators and congresspeople. Write to both anti-choice and pro-choice. Those who are against reproductive freedom for women need to know how many women will vote based on this issue, which affects every woman personally. The pro-choice congresspeople need to know that they're supported. Ask Vivian. Women's Center volunteers, and we can always use more of them, are currently organizing a letter writing campaign which will hopefully be active at a table in the UC by late April. And number 7, continue to support pro-choice activities like this one. Attend vigils, talks, and protests. Make your voice heard both publicly and privately. We've seen a waning in pro-choice and women's rights activities since the years of the Roe versus Wade decision. It seems that women, especially women of my generation, I think, now take our own control of our bodies for granted as a right. My generation's never lived without the ability to make reproductive choices for ourselves, though I would argue that faults in areas such as insurance coverage, child care services, and maternity leave, our reproductive choices are limited. But I don't think my generation would particularly like to have our reproductive freedoms even more limited, and I don't think that those women who've worked hard to get where we are would easily accept defeat of what they've worked so hard for. Those of you here, though you may not be as many as I had wished for, those of you who are here are those who are determined and committed. And you need to get your friends involved, everybody you know. We need to spread our passion about this issue. We've got a lot of work to do, not only to keep abortion legal, but also to promote and improve an improvement in the cultural attitude towards women's roles in society and the cultural acceptance of women making decisions for themselves.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions here that are somewhat the same. These pro-choice gatherings always attract the same people. We all know the issues at stake. How can we get through or attract the general public in this campaign? Another one asks, how do we get involved more men in this campaign? And this was directed to Judy and Vivian also.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that was mentioned several times tonight, one of the reasons we don't draw more different kinds of folks to this, is it's an area that is painful for people. There's no doubt about it. So when Lindsay was mentioning her experience, certainly those of us who've been working on pro-choice for a long, long time know the level of hostility, but we also know that people want to avoid conflict. So in some ways, it's pretty difficult to not draw the people that are pretty committed to your side already, and the other folks really don't want to come. Someone from the Kaiman called me today and asked me, I guess I talked to him yesterday, if we really needed to do another educational event. So I think that was the perception out there of a lot of people. What I said is, well, it depends on what you mean by education. Sure, a lot of folks have some information, but do they really understand the situation right now and what we can do about it? Very few people have that kind of education. So that's the way I tend to talk is, here's the situation as I see it, here's what I think we can do about it, let's do it. As for men, well, we know from the different attitude surveys that actually men are at least as pro-choice as women are in theory. Now, I have a point of view of how it is in practice, but in theory, I think that basically men are very supportive of pro-choice, and certainly a lot of the folks that I know spend time voting and going to different kinds of activities. So I don't think that's the major issue here. I do think one of the problems we have that was addressed a couple times in the panel is, I really think this is an issue that women need to make the decision on. And so it could be an uncomfortable issue for some men, and I've had discussions with men over that. I just think, to put it simply, men should butt out on this. And that's not something that everyone certainly agrees with, and they certainly don't have to, but I think that women are the ones to make the decision, so it's fine with me that the majority of folks that are working on this issue are women.
And Judy, your last question is, will you run for governor?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is pretty amusing to me. I have a lot of friends who ask me why I don't run for office. And what I say is, if I can say all the things I say, and people will elect me, I'll run. Because I think it's real important to be very clear and honest about the issues and how you feel. And I do community organizing in rural communities, and the other day I was in Sanders County, and this person and I were talking, and finally he said, I listened to you on the radio, and I can't believe you're the same person. So I'll run for governor when Montana's ready to have someone who has all of my opinions and could actually get elected. But basically, I think you're out there and having to push the electoral politics system. So I'm out here sort of pushing Vivian. I'm not going to be Vivian right now, but someday when things change more, no, I'm serious. When things change more, maybe people like myself would be more inside there. So let me encourage both of those, be inside and be outside. I think they both are important for each other.
I wanted to respond just a little bit to the comment about involving men, and I come from a little bit of a different perspective. When I look out into a crowd and I see male faces there, it makes me very, very happy. I, for one, do not believe that this is a women's issue, although I do believe that women have the most to lose in this issue. I don't think we can do it without men. And we have benefited directly from the involvement of men in many ways at our clinic. What kept the people, the Operation Rescue people, out of our clinic last November was 2 big guys at the door. And I don't know what we would have done without them. I personally am very glad to see you here, and please bring your friends next time. You are very welcome.
Let's follow that up. Here's a question for Willa that says, it seems that males involved in pregnancy or abortion with which they are part of the Pregnancy Act are overall mostly excluded, seeing that the pro-choice issue is also a feminist rights issue. How do you feel about males supporting pregnant females emotionally as well as financially?
Try to look at that. That was a long one.
Well, while Willa works on
Why
that.
don't I work on this one?
Yeah, sure. All right, well, Willa works on it.
It's one of the most important. I talk to women every week who are coming in to have an abortion, and one of the most important factors in their decision is their relationship with their partner. And one of the most common reasons that they decide not to continue the pregnancy is the relationship's really not that good. The man is not prepared to take on the responsibilities of being a father. They just broke up anyway, and everything's a mess. In rare situations where there's actually abuse or more difficult problems with the relationship. So I think that while the decision has to be ultimately the woman's decision, that her partner has an enormous influence on what she decides. And his support and encouragement can make all the difference in the world. If she trusts him and is able to believe that he'll be there for her and the child, she's very, very much more likely to want to go ahead and start a family. Whereas if she can see from the get-go that she's going to be doing this on her own, it's a pretty daunting undertaking and not the ideal situation in most women's minds.
This is to Willa. Does Blue Mountain Clinic provide fetal development information to women prior to counseling them for abortion? It seems that if you're concerned about the welfare of women and their choices, they should be informed about all the alternatives.
Yes, that information is available to women in the course of counseling. Counseling is fairly standardized, and there's a lot of things that we hit on. We do discuss the adoption option. We have a file of dear birth mother letters from people all over the country that the woman is free to look at if she wants to perhaps pick out possible parents, if she wants to continue her pregnancy. We certainly discuss the stage of development of the fetus and how that relates to where she is in her last menstrual period. If there's any possibility that she is out of the first trimester, we would discuss what that would mean in terms of difference of procedure and difference in terms of fetal development. That's basic to good informed consent, which is a requirement of any surgical procedure, and abortion is certainly no different. It would be unethical for us to do otherwise.
Melanie, could you tell us the Catholics for Free Choice survey's information on the Montana senators and representatives? Their voting, highlight maybe a couple of their voting records.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I was describing comparing the voting records of on how they voted on Planned Parenthood Federation of America issues and Children's Defense Fund, which is the group that works with children's issues, and the American Public Health Association. In Montana, Senator Baucus was voted 100% on the Planned Parenthood Federation issues, 86% on Children's Defense Fund, and 64% on American Public Health Association. Senator Burns voted 0 with Planned Parenthood Federation on issues. He voted 29% on Children's Defense Funds, and he voted 15% on American Public Health Association issues. Now, as far as with our representatives, Representative Ron Marlenet voted 0 on Planned Parenthood Federation issues. He got a 13% on Children's Defense Fund issues, and he got a 0 on American Public Health Association issues. Representative Pat Williams got 100% on Planned Parenthood issues, and 88% on Children's Defense Fund issues, and voted 71% of the time with the American Public Health Association. So I guess what I think is important to take is to use this information to educate. Perhaps that might be your conversation, along with encouraging them to overturn the gag rule, is to talk to them a little bit about the information you learned about the discrepancies with some of the voting records. Being anti-choice, yet not voting for children's and public health issues, might make an interesting conversation or an interesting letter.
Is it possible to provide lower costs or even free medical help for lower or non-income clients, especially for crisis pregnancies?
Blue Mountain Clinic is a private nonprofit clinic, and what that means is that we do not accept any federal or state funding for any of our services. That's a little bit of wisdom that was part of the founding of the clinic, and that obviously with what Melanie is facing in terms of the gag rule is now serving us very well. We are self-sufficient. We try to work hand in hand with Planned Parenthood and other organizations in the community to see that low-income women do have access to abortion services and also prenatal care services. We serve predominantly Medicaid-eligible women in our prenatal care program. As you know, Medicaid does not pay for abortion services in Montana, except in the case of the life of the woman being endangered. I think Vivian made a very good point about trying to access the crime victims fund to help pay for some women in that case, but it still leaves out a large block of women who we are discriminating against in a very blatant way. We pay for every aspect of prenatal care for women in this state with Medicaid funds, and yet we pay for not, well, since 1973, we have paid for less than 4 abortions for women out of Medicaid funding in this state. I think that's blatant discrimination. We're trying to work with women in any way we can financially to help them gain access to the service, but it's very hard for us to take on that entire population of women and to pay for their services in this area.
Do you think that the nation's youth are generally choosing a more conservative outlook? And if so, how does this affect the abortion issue?
There's been a lot of work actually with teens. It's one of the areas I do some work with. And a lot of teens these days, although people will say they're more conservative, you look at what they actually do as opposed to some of these attitude surveys, etc. Kids' behavior isn't more conservative. Anybody who has a parent of a teen now probably will totally back this up. Basically, what's happening is we had the Reagan administration try this little item called Just Say No and pretend that that was going to make a difference for kids' behavior, and now we have plenty of evidence that it hasn't worked at all. In fact, the Children's Defense Fund that Melanie was mentioning has come out with some real interesting work done on kids who just have laughed about that whole approach of Just Say No. And if anything, it seems to me the sexual activity is going younger and younger. The whole discussion of kids' behavior on some of those other issues like drugs and violence is very unfortunate in my opinion, because it shows that a lot of young folks are definitely getting involved in what I would not consider conservative behavior. So I think that kind of discussion comes out of a real lack of understanding of what's going on with kids right now.
I don't know if anybody else heard this on NPR last week, but there was a horrifying statistic, and I think it was through the Children's Defense Fund. They did a research project about teenage pregnancy, that about 66% of those young girls who were pregnant had been sexually abused. And the Just Say No campaign, in any regard to anything, doesn't work if you've been sexually abused, because you're so frightened as a victim of that abuse that you're afraid to say no, and that doesn't mean anything. You just don't, there isn't, when sex education is taught in schools to young women who've been abused and are victims, there's a real, there just isn't that message. It doesn't come across. And you have to come at a lot of different preventative means in a lot of different ways. And so teenage pregnancy, I think, is going to have to go even further into preventing child abuse, child neglect, and sexual abuse. I mean, there's all kinds of complications in our society that I don't think we can just say kids are more conservative and therefore they're not going to choose something. I think there's a lot of complexities to what we see, how pregnancy is becoming, you know, teenage pregnancy is so prevalent. And I was just horrified at that statistic, but it makes sense, you know. I mean, if a person's afraid to say no, they're more than likely going to be a victim again and then probably have an unwanted pregnancy.
How does a person most effectively deal with the verbal harassment and downright hatred of the right to life people?
Well, after tonight, I'm going to recall Lindsay's poem. That's what I learned. We instruct people that work on behalf of the clinic as escorts and people on staff to have absolutely no response. And we generate our own satisfaction and our own peace from ourselves, and that sustains us.
Thank you all very much. Good night.